I don't drink it. So, right. Are we live? Right, I'll behave now. Okay. Welcome to today's meeting. This is a public meeting, and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording, and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. So thank you all for coming tonight in this lovely weather. Agenda item 1, do we have any appointments of substitutes?
Yes, Chair, we have Councillor Stephen Hodgson for Councillor Roberts, Councillor Riaz for Councillor Norfolk, and Councillor Aladita for Councillor Hassan. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? Okay,
There's none, Chair.
Agenda item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Any comments? Take them page at a time. Sorry? Any comments on page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Thank you. I'll take those as. Agenda item. Our last meeting, we had our Environmental and Sustainability Summit at the end of September. And I know a lot of you attended, so thank you. And I just want to just put on record, I thought it was a really successful event, and would just like to minute my thanks to the officers, in particular Claire, for organising the event. And I don't know if anyone else has a comment they want to say regarding the summit, then please feel free.
Not the summit, Chair, but the recent walk which we had as a committee around the Lawnbrook Nature Reserve. I know Robert Norfolk would like to pass on her thanks for those members and officers who took part in it. It was certainly an enlightening experience, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you. Anything else?
I'd say that the visit was really useful, actually, and I look forward to more visits around the city. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that. So we'll now move on to agenda item 5, which is the paper on the goal control. So a review of the works for the last year and then the proposed programme for next year.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, everybody. The report in front of you summarises the goal control work we've undertaken this year in section 2, and that forms part of our goal control strategy of minimising the negative impact of the goals in the City of Worcester. 2.5 gives the summary of the findings of the population survey that we undertook this year. You'll note there's a slight increase in numbers. 5.4% represents from the previous survey 2 years ago. I'll remind you that the aim is not to eradicate the birds from the city in its entirety. It's about controlling the overall population to minimise the negative impact, because to remove them will be counterproductive to our ability to be able to undertake controls where we need to. The gold proofing measures contributed to a reduced rate of growth of the population and the lower numbers than expected in some areas. It's worth noting, with reference to roofs being netted, and there were several roofs observed that kind of control undertaken. Only one of those roofs was netted in accordance with our strategy and the work that we're doing as the local authority, because there has been some negative press around netting. And the one that we installed has been done correctly in an approved manner that doesn't compromise the animal welfare standards of the birds. 2.7 describes how we continue to work with others to progress the knowledge and understanding of the birds to the benefit of Worcester residents and businesses. And 2.9 sets out our nest and egg removal work. That's been done using an organisational licence, and we're only one of two local authorities that have got that organisational licence still with Natural England. And that allows us to take nest and egg removal with roofs or locations that have got less than 30 nests. There are some other controls into how we can operate under that licence, but it's enabled us to remove nests and eggs on many of the roofs in the city centre and other locations. And we've used that where we've got significant public health and safety harm that's been identified, such as sleep deprivation, mental health issues, or physical attacks, which are particularly noted in some locations where we've got the elderly and the vulnerable. We have to, in using that organisational licence, we have to demonstrate not that we've tried non-lethal methods to control the birds and show that the lethal controls are the last resort and we're not just jumping to those kind of methods. We've also used individual licences where we've got in excess of 30 nests, and we've been successful in getting the application for those where we've done that. There were 4 locations where we applied for individual licences. That's Melpas Stallard, NAL in Weir Lane, RGS, and the King Street Apartments in the Diglis Waterside area. 2.15 sets out our gull exclusion zone, something we introduced last year, where we were focusing our activity in 3 particular locations where we've got negative impact of gulls, and we've demonstrated the public health and safety harm already. And we were trying to coordinate our efforts so that we didn't compromise what we were doing. We were doing a thorough approach in specific discrete locations. The focus of that has been on prevention, so gull proofing where we can, working with landowners to co-fund that work. So it's not just draining the council reserves, we're also working with people to try and improve their own situation and their own property. That was also supplemented with deterrent hawking in locations to try and discourage birds from nesting in those locations, and creating gull-free zones. The 3 locations we were focusing on was around the tithing area, including Britannia Square. And there's been a really good response there where we've had very little gull activity, certainly in terms of nesting in that location. And around NAL and Weir Lane in St John's, where there was a large subcolony, and the work there has been really good. Unfortunately, we've had some displacement that we're going to be working on this coming year, and also there were 3 nests that we couldn't get to. In Fish Street, which was the 3rd area, it's been trickier to tackle there, but we have had some progress and some gains. Certainly the situation's improved for residents, but we recognise there's more work to be done there. 2.27 sets out the subsidised gull proofing work that was particularly done in the gull exclusion zones. And a lot of that is still being undertaken in the non-breeding season to try and operate without the need for a licence. We focused on the gull exclusion, as I said, and where we've identified problems, we've been working with the residents to try and resolve that. And there's a number of terrace properties where we've worked on the whole row to try and prevent it from displacement. And we've worked with the landowner of the fire station that's being redeveloped to make sure that we don't have problems there when residents take up occupancy, and also to the betterment of the residents we've already got in that locality. And also on our own property, such as the Guildhall, to try and make sure that we're not allowing birds to nest here and doing what we'd expect others to do. 42% of the proofing work that has been undertaken across the city in conjunction with us has been funded by private individuals or businesses, and that's worth recognising that your funding is going further by that kind of approach. And it supports our overall strategy of the non-lethal controls where we can to try and prevent the problems reoccurring next year and minimising the amount of work we need to do when we come to next year. Because if we've proofed, then we don't need to go back because the birds won't be nesting there. 2.32 sets out the deterrent hawking work that we were doing, primarily pre-breeding season. It's helped to delay the breeding by a couple of weeks of the birds. And whilst that doesn't sound like much and they're still breeding, it is significant because it reduces the amount of time the birds have got to relay. It reduces the viability of the location for birds to nest. and makes it generally a less favourable location. We can also cover wider areas than just our gull exclusion zones or areas where we've demonstrated public harm. And that we've noticed changes in behaviour of the birds as a result of the hawking, and that is particularly important where we've got swooping and attacks, and that's something we started to observe in the Cathedral Plaza area where we hadn't had it previously. We've had it down the High Street where we've had nests, but not in the Cathedral Plaza area. 2.337 gives an overall summary of the work we've done this year, including some statistics. The numbers are not significantly different from last year, which is a positive because it demonstrates that our interventions are working, because we shouldn't see those numbers going up. And in particular, the chick removal figure should be low. Because if you're seeing that we're having to remove chicks, we failed in doing the gull proofing and we failed in doing the nest and egg removal at that stage, so that you should expect that to be low. We have seen displacement and new locations have popped up. And there are negatives associated with that because obviously new people are being impacted by gulls potentially. They may be less sensitive, so it may be not so much of an issue. It may be in a less sensitive location. But we are working with those landowners where there is a problem to undertake gull proofing and take measures themselves. We move on to section 3, which sets out the proposals for next year, primarily within budget. So this is to maintain the success that we've had this year and previous years and build on that. 3.2 is the nest and egg removal work, and continuing with that under the organisational licence that we're looking to apply for from Natural England. And that's approximately 57% of the budget. There are some wider things in there in terms of deterrence that would also be included in that. 3.6 is the subsidised gull proofing work with a focus on the gull exclusion zones where we've got public health and safety harm identified, and working with landowners again to contribute to funding that. And then 3.9 is the specific work at Weir Lane, where you noted in my summary of this year's activity that we had a scaffolding tower to act as a deterrent on the large sub-colony we got there, because we can't get onto the roofs very easily on a regular basis. So by having physical presence around a gull colony, it creates that disturbance. The birds don't like it and makes it a less favourable location. And it certainly in Weir Lane this year, it worked really successfully, as well as the nest and egg removal. And it also prevented the displacement in the immediate surroundings as well. So that's within budget. Section 4 gives you the opportunity to consider some enhancements to that if you're minded to approve budget for that. 4.2 sets out an enhanced gull proofing where we could do more of the roofs that we've identified as being particularly problematic, or maybe adjacent to roofs or locations where we already identified a problem and we're working with the landowner or propose to within the budget money. We'd look to do that again in accordance with the landowner, in conjunction with the landowners and residents and businesses to try and enhance that work so we can spread it further by getting contributions. So that would be an additional 21,300 if you chose to do that. And 4.5 sets out deterrent hawking that we're not proposing this year to stay within budget, but if you chose that to be a recommendation to go forward, then that would support the overall work we're doing across the city. It allows us to work outside of the gull exclusion zones to make the city a less favourable place. And this year we demonstrated that an early start to that prevents the birds from becoming settled until later. It also allows us to be flexible in our approach around the city, such as the gull swooping as an example. And again, like the hawking that we did this year, we'd look for it to be part funded by businesses and residents where they particularly wanted it in their locations. Section 5 sets out the alternative options that have been considered, and they're the same as previously. I have added some additional things to bring them up to date, but they've been discounted. So if I bring you back to the recommendations, Chair, 1.1 is to note the work that we've undertaken this year to date. 1.2 is to endorse the proposed goal control work programme as contained in section 3 of the report. And 1.3 and 1.4 allows you to consider if should funding be agreed to do enhanced goal proofing work, and 1.5 to 1.6 deterrent hawking work in the same vein. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that report, and certainly I think Worcester's one of the leading cities in the country now in terms of our goal control programme work and the expertise that's been built up. So just before I sort of pass on to members to ask questions, it's just worth just bear in mind so that there's a base budget within the WRS budget, so that's a recurring budget, so that's effectively already in there. But for the last 2 years, we've added to that budget, but it's only been, each year's been one-off. So therefore that's why the paper's presented as it is, where you've got work that would be included within the base budget, as Mark explained, and then if we wanted to increase the budget again as a one-off, then we've got two options. We go for the additional goal proofing work, which Mark's explained also enables additional contributions from landlords, so it actually goes further and is also quite key for getting permission for some of the other methods, because we're showing that we're using non-lethal methods. So it provides a broader opportunity with Natural England to do wider measures, and then we could potentially go further and ask for additional funding for walking. So Jabba, did you want to ask questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark, for that comprehensive report. Clearly, we've been doing quite a lot of work in to tackle the issue over the last couple of years in terms of that, and to a certain extent, quite rightly so. I mean, what the question that I have through you, Chair, is there a law of diminishing returns with the amount of effort we put in, and how much effort do we have to put in to achieve the result that we require, and how long is that going to take? So we can keep throwing a lot of money at it, but not realise the benefit of it until maybe, you know, year four, year 5, before the full results are known. Knowing the fickle nature of the fickle nature of the what we're trying to achieve here in terms of quick results. Are there any quicker results that are available? That's question number one. The second part to the question is then, how many goals would have been born if we hadn't implemented these measures?
Thank you, Chair, if I may. With regard to the law of diminishing returns, I think the focus has always got to be on where we've got public health and safety harm. So wherever we've got somebody who's suffering to that extent, whether it be mental anguish, sleep deprivation that is affecting their health, or that they're physically being attacked by a bird, I think there'd be a justifiable reason to take the necessary action, and I think it would be right to do that. But most of our work and the funds, whether it's within budget or the enhanced bit, is about prevention, and it's about reducing the displacement that would occur. So I think you're right, there would be a diminishing returns in coming years, but we're not at that stage yet. We're only looking at small, discrete areas of the city where we've already identified public health and safety harm. With regard to numbers of birds, your second question, the numbers of birds that we would have prevented from hatching, the summary table, if I can find it, yes, sets out how many nests we've removed and how many eggs we've removed. They are across several laying attempts. So it's difficult to say, because once you've taken the eggs and nests from that first attempt, they'll quite often go to attempt the second. I think what we can say is there is large areas of where we've identified nests and nests that we've prevented them from nesting this year. And those are in locations where we've got public health and safety and significant negative impacts on the birds. There, as the population summary talks about, we've got large areas of the city where we've got birds nesting, and we're not tackling those because we're focusing where we've got that public health and safety harm. And we've demonstrated that we've got roofs where we haven't had any birds nesting for the first or second year running, you know, where we previously they've had lots of problems.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And that's the nature of the question in terms of obviously the city centre. There's a large numbers of gulls nesting in here, and that the first or second year effects won't be noticed until maybe 3 or 4 years, certainly by the residents, because we've got such a large number of here. The other element to this, I think, is obviously when we had that specialist talk to us regarding these measures that we were putting, he placed a lot of emphasis on the supply of food. Yet we, from an enforcement perspective within the city centre, we still, in terms of litter and in terms of our food outlets, leaving food sources out there, as well as our residents. And that is a huge contributory factor for the gulls nesting in here. What emphasis are we placing in this report in terms of enforcement of those institutes?
Thank you, Councillor. If I may, Chair. The presentation we had previously was from a gull expert, and at that point in time we hadn't noticed the positive impacts that the gull proofing work that we had started to do at that time has now had. So we found a method of complying with the conservation regulations and planning that enables us to stop birds from nesting in particular locations, so that the wire cages we've got on our chimney stacks and in the roof gullies, we hadn't had that previously. So that has had a big impact on the breeding success, and that's something that the expert Peter Rock wasn't aware of, and also it's something that he wasn't able to take into consideration in that presentation. In terms of the food element, I'm working with my colleagues at the City Council to ensure that where we are identifying any problems or issues, that it is being fed through to the council staff so they can address that. And we've got a good working relationship with the guys on the ground who are doing that work, with Gordon, who's our technical officer, doing goal control work.
Thank you. And finally, sorry, the question has always been about value for money in terms of the amount of money that we're putting in, and I think you've demonstrated with the match funding that the businesses are putting in that actually it goes a lot further than we originally expected. So on balance, I think I'll be supporting this.
Thank you, Jabba. And it's probably worth also pointing out that, as well as protecting individuals that are suffering stress and distress from the gulls, it's also about protecting the high street as an attractive location that people want to visit. And a lot of the the primary gull nesting sites are in the city centre just because of the older buildings. And I think that's a key objective, is to make we all want the city centre to be thriving and attractive, and being attacked by gulls and isn't part of that. I've got a list, so Simon's next.
Thank you, Chair. I'd first of all like to say what an excellent report. This is the best report we've had on this problem ever. For years we were getting fobbed off with unbelievable figures. Thank heaven we've got a report which specifies in detail all the areas which are affected, all the measures that are being taken to deal with it, and these are all sensible things. Some of us have been banging on about them for years, and they're happening, and thank heaven for that. It recognises the diversity of the city and all the areas, Lower Wick, the city centre. We all know about the city centre. About time too, but what a breath of fresh air to see such a good report. I've just got a couple of questions really out of curiosity more than anything. what sort of concentration of gulls in a particular area would trigger an intervention? The other thing was, how have you identified where to apply, I like the expression, gull exclusion zones? Some of those appear more obvious than others. We'd all love to have none of them in the high street. But how have those been selected? The other thing really was just to echo a point that's already been made, but about the food sources in the city centre. It's still seen as acceptable by some people to actually go into town with a bag of breadcrumbs and sit on a bench and feed. People like to do this for the pigeons. I don't think anybody really wants to do it for the gulls, but the gulls will eat the food, they'll eat the pigeons as well. I think we need to make this socially unacceptable. How we go about that, I don't know. We need to educate people that it's causing a problem.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. Okay, what sort of concentration triggers intervention? It's about the individual that's being impacted. So where you've got one individual, and we had a lady who was pregnant who was in anguish over the gulls disturbing her during the night and early hours, and she was struggling with mental health and her own general health because of the disturbance she was having from the birds, and it was a particular dire situation. So in that case, it was just one person, one gull nest that was causing that issue or problem. But what we did was we tackled all of the properties in that row of terrace to ensure that the bird just didn't move next door. But it might be somewhere like the subcolony. We've got it in Lower Wick, where we've got 35 nests that are regularly there, that are because of the number of them, it's causing a significant problem to a large number of residents. So it's very much about identifying that public health and safety harm and gathering the evidence that's needed for the license application to be able to take that lethal control, be it nest, egg or chick removal. But the gull proofing work outside of season doesn't need that license, so anybody can take the gull proofing measures they might wish to on their own property. With regard to how you identify the gull exclusion zones, yes, some of them were obvious because we've had the numbers of reports of either physical attacks or the mental health or sleep deprivation. We've got clusters of where we've got those individuals that are impacted, so we can easily apply the public health and safety test for the nest and egg removal, but the wider hawking can apply to a slightly wider area. So we've gone for discrete areas where we can focus our attention and not spread ourselves too thinly, because there's a lot of proactive work there, not just reactive in those gull exclusion zones. And then finally, in relation to food sources, we've got the public space protection order to prevent the feeding of gulls and pigeons where we can take enforcement action, and that's something that I could work with my colleagues to talk about the publicity of that and how we encourage people to act appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Just so everyone knows where they're on the list, it's Ditta next, then Owen, then Zoe, then Karen, and then Marjorie. So, Ditta, you're up next.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Mark, a couple of questions through you, Chair. I mean, I'm familiar, I'm not on the committee, but I'm fairly familiar territory, I'm afraid. I came across at the Guildhall about removing the chicks, and it was quite a daunting, they need a couple of statements and restatements, and I mean, it's a daunting experience if somebody has it. Is that moved on? Have we improved that scenario? If a chick needs to be removed, it's causing sort of grief to a particular family.
Right, thank you, Councillor. Yes, in that once we've established that somebody is suffering that level of harm, then we've got our evidence base already in terms of we've spoken to doctors and scientists about how sleep deprivation affects people. So the background information, we've got that. We've done our homework there. It's just finding where there's the individual case, we do need the evidence to be able to take lethal control, and we need to satisfy the licence conditions.
So, sorry, forgive me. What's the period? Will it? I mean, I phone you and complain about what would be the trigger? What mechanism? Would it take 2 days, 3 days? How long would that process take? That was my sort of cynical question, if you like, in the between.
It would depend on the scenario. So if it's something where we can act in accordance with the organisational licence, as long as we've satisfied that we're in compliance with the licence requirements, then we can take action straight away. It's just about the logistics of getting the kit and the individuals we need to undertake the intervention, whether that's a cherry picker or whatever. Where it's on a site where we've got more than 30 nests, we would need to apply for an individual licence for that roof, so there's a delay in that. But in the meantime, we'll be gathering the evidence, so we've got what we need to have a successful outcome with our application. But there may be locations where the negative impact doesn't meet the bar of being able to take lethal control. So what we'd do is look to work with the individual concerned out of the breeding season to take non-lethal control and proof the property effectively, so they don't have that problem next year.
Thank you, Mark. The element is that I understand that you encouraging this netting, sort of the mesh on chimneys or whatever, and that is also included with the landlords and other property holders, or are we considering housing association, or are we working partly? How are we developing that? Because I thought in their interest as well as ours.
We're working with whoever is the appropriate person in relation to that property. So it may well be a business, it may be the landlord, it may be the resident. Because each roof is different, and so it might require a different method of proofing. We've steered away from netting wherever we can because of the animal welfare concerns about that and the ongoing requirement to maintain it and do welfare checks. But the steel cage, the hard cage that we're putting on the chimney stacks at the moment, that has been with whoever owns the property, because obviously we're fixing something to the property, so we've been working with them. And what we've tended to do, and there has been the odd exception, but what we've tended to do is where we go in there, we remove the nest and eggs as part of the nest and egg removal, and we've got the costs of the cherry picker covered in that. But when we're doing that, the first time we're measuring up to see how we're going to fit the steel cage, and the second time we go to remove the nest and eggs from the second attempt at laying, we'd look to install the steel mesh cage on that chimney stack or in the roof gully or wherever it may be, to reduce the costs on the local authority and the homeowner, and the homeowner would cover the costs of the actual metal cage, would cover the costs of going up the chimney to take the nest and eggs.
The last one, I promise. Chair, sorry, I didn't want to put them all on the list, and then just the, disbursements. I think it's a one way of an excellent way of sort of demonstrating that, and that's the method that I would sort of prefer. If it was the hawk, I think you said that the disbursement, when the hawk comes out, it would disperse it somewhere else, and it always happens in the nesting period, and then they would go find somewhere else to spot. Do they actually nest, or do they go off nesting, laying eggs?
There's two types of displacement in that case, Chair, thank you. Where the hawk flies, yes, you get the birds lift. The gulls are lift, and they'll look to get higher than the hawk while the hawk is actually flying. But that's only a temporal displacement, and they'll tend to return to their roofs unless you've got the repeated hawking on an ad hoc basis in a discrete location. What our overall strategy has done is effectively excluded gulls from nesting on particular roofs, and so they're looking for an alternative site, and so they'll go to the nearest and best alternative next door. So, and that's where the displacements happened in some locations, most notably Lower Wick as an example. We've disrupted that colony, but they were so desperate to breed, they found an alternative roof that's not quite as good, not quite as safe, which in theory should make them easier to displace this coming year.
Last one, Chair, as I said before, but there's one more. On the bin side, I think we've got new bins, which are very exclusive. I think they're doing a wonderful job in compared to the previous ones, where they actually got the food out and they were displacing them all over the place when people... I know the night economy sort of encourages, and there's a bit more work to do on there. But I would urge and request the chair, and through this committee, if I'm permitted, that we also consider the Hawk, and I think that does make and support the evidence that's already been allocated. And that's why I'm very keen to support all the recommendations that are required. I mean, I'll be taken by the rest of the committee with how they feel, because I'm only a sort of bystander coming today. So thank you, Chair, for allowing me that.
Thank you. And I'd just like to add that I think probably a year ago now that I went out with the gull officer, and he does have a sort of encyclopedic knowledge of where all the nests are, who the building owners are, whether it's a business, whether it's a landlord, and that's where we're at now, where we're building all those contacts, and that knowledge base is just invaluable if you're then going to be putting in these sort of permanent measures. Right, so on we go. Owen, you're next.
Thanks, Chairman. I've got a question for the officer. It follows on from what Councillor Ditter just said about the hawks, and it's probably sort of parallel to this. I remember a few years ago there were peregrine falcons nesting near the cathedral, and I'm just wondering, are they still there? And if they're not, can we encourage them there? Because they're free pest control. So I don't know if they're there or not. If you can explain to me, that'd be great.
I can't answer that question. I'm sure the gull officer probably does know, because he's in liaison with the gentlemen who look after the tower where they were nesting. If hawking is to be done, it needs to be consistent in its deterrent in a particular location and intensity at the start of the breeding season to be effective. But it has to be as part of an array of measures. In terms of a natural birds of prey, we don't have sufficient nesting sites for the number and volume of birds we'd need to significantly impact the gull population in the city.
Just as a follow-up, is the presence of the hawks, is that a detriment to peregrine falcons nesting here? Because personally, the peregrines would be my preference. So is there a link between the two? Does one displace the other in terms of a predator?
We work hard to not have a negative impact on our native wildlife with the exclusion of the target species that we are after. Be it blackbirds or peregrine falcons, there's a code of conduct that the pest controllers that we use adhere to make sure that we haven't got a detrimental impact on the peregrines. So where we've identified where peregrines are, certainly the year that they were nesting when we first did hawking, we avoided the location around where they were, and they were seen flying out the other way, away from where the hawks are flying at the time. So it didn't significantly impact on them.
The question though is the presence of the hawk likely to inhibit them coming back?
No, not to their usual place of nesting, because we avoid that location.
I think when I spent some time with the hawkers, I think it's quite clear that they weren't allowed effectively to harm any wildlife. They were fed, and they were there to be to disrupt, not to kill, and anything. Yeah.
I wasn't thinking that they were attacking the peregrines, but the peregrine is a perfect predator for the area, was my point. And I was concerned that the hawk might displace them. If that's not the fact, then...
If it helps the committee, the peregrine chicks were born at Worcester Cathedral this year, I think for the first time for about 10 years. So that was back in the spring. I was just completing my research.
Sorry?
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I'm going to be really parochial. You talk about Blackpool. I just wanted to know, I'm the elected member for Rainbow Hill, so it's on my patch or close to. So I just was interested to see how many you had there. And I wanted just to ask you sort of what you would define as Blackpool, as sort of a first question, whether you've got any theories of why it's not causing a nuisance there. And I'm really glad it's not. As yet, I've had no complaints. Famous last words. And also some reassurance that you've put that residents close to the Blackpool area, which likely to be in my ward are beginning to make complaints, that I'm happy that if there's no concerns at the moment, it's not a target area, but assurance that you would continue to monitor that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for your questions. Blackpool has has a significant proportion of the population breeding up there. And so when we're talking about Blackpool, we're talking about the large industrial roofs that facilitate large breeding colonies or subcolonies. So that's where they're nesting. And clearly around the periphery of that, you'll get some other birds that are nesting, and that has been on some residential roofs. So that's where we've had a couple of complaints, or that the birds that are nesting on the large industrial premises are causing some kind of disturbance to the residents. We haven't identified any significant public health and safety harm in that location yet, but wherever somebody is concerned about gulls, out of the breeding season, we'll be working with them to try and gull-proof their own property where we can, particularly if there's the enhanced budget for doing their gull-proofing work. And we're trying to support the residents or businesses in doing that. The big issue in Blackpool has been mess, primarily. So a lot of the businesses, as they're walking from their car park into the factory unit or the warehouse, they've got birds that are defecating on them as they're walking across, because people are near their nests, or where it's car showrooms, the cars have been dirted. So those are the primary reasons. They don't hit the bar for the public health and safety harm and being able to take that formal action under any licence. And indeed, whilst the business owners may not want the birds there, that it is in their power to be able to do something to their own roofs to disrupt them should they wish to. But it doesn't suit our aim, because it would restrict what we could do under an organisational licence if we started tackling all areas of the city where the birds just happen to be nesting.
That's fine. I'm completely comfortable with that. It's just the fact where it says residents close to the area are beginning to be impacted, and I'd want to make sure that that was just being actively monitored. But it's from your report that would seem to be the case. And I'd just like to echo Simon's comments. I think it is a really interesting, really comprehensive report.
Thank you. Karen?
Thank you, Chair. I'm the Arboretum Ward Councillor, and I'm really glad that you brought up the pregnant residents, because I just want to, for councillors that don't realise, the gulls don't just make noise in the daytime, it's in the night time as well. It can start like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and then go on till midnight. It is extremely disruptive to people's lives. You probably all know that I'm an animal activist, and obviously herring gulls and black-backed gulls are, in decline. So I'm really happy that in the report you say that chicks are relocated to more suitable sites by the coast and can help populations there flourish. And I really, really like the fact that you're focusing so much on prevention in the right places, because I completely understand the distress that it causes residents when they're in the wrong place. And talking about other areas in the city, the problem with the Arboretum is that we've got some really lovely big chimneys, and the big chimneys is what the girls really like. So one of the other problems is when we looked at the swimming pool application, I know that I sent it to the gull officer to check the new roofs going there, and he was very happy. And so my point really is that when we do new developments in the Shrub Hill area with all those new buildings, it'd be really good if the gull officer could have a look at the designs and give their opinion, so we don't build in problems. And then also going back to the litter, I know that we've got gull-proof bags that we use, which are obviously a great asset where we've got them as well. So really, I just think your whole approach is so systematic and thorough. So I just want to thank you as well. Okay.
Thank you, Karen. Marjorie?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo what other people have said about this report. It's really good, thorough, very well written. I've just got a question about the extra spending that you're recommending. We're short of money, as I expect you know. If you had a choice between, if we could only do one of these two things, either the extra 21,300 or the extra hawking programme, which would you prefer? Which would have the most effect?
If I may, Chair, It'll be the gull exclusion, the gull proofing, because that's a permanent solution. It's working with the residents to assist them to improve their lives, and also it gets the additional contribution in the same Hawking does, but they contribute to the funding of that, so it goes further.
Okay, I think that's everybody. So thank you all very much for your comments. So we have got some options before us. Would you like to make?
Yeah, Chair, I did say that I would recommend all of them from
Okay.
1.1 to 1.6, but
Let's.
if you want to take it in block, I'm happy.
No, I mean the general feeling of the committee has been, that I've picked up, has been very positive, and I think we should reward success. So if committee are happy to take 1.1 through to 1.6, so we're actually going to ask for the both additional recommendations, then should we take a vote on that first? So on block recommendations 1.1 through to 1.6. All those in favour? Okay, I think that's everyone. Yep. Just double check. Any abstentions? Any against? Brilliant. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mark, for fielding all those questions. Okay, so on to agenda item 6. So we have a paper on the early replacement of refuse collection vehicles, which was requesting funding from the capital programme. So who's going to take the lead? Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, members will have met Sandra. Members probably wouldn't have met Derek Keenan, who's our fleet manager. So just to introduce Derek to everybody, and Derek and Sandra are here for questions just a little bit later on. Chair, the council has a capital programme, and there's provision in that to replace vehicles through until 2036. And at the moment, the lead-in time for procuring refuse collection vehicles, what we refer to as RCVs, is up to 52 weeks due to many factors which are outside of our control. Next year and the year after, we are due to replace 7 RCVs, and they are 15 and 16 plated vehicles, so they're 6 and 7 years old. And to use a phrase David Sutton used to me earlier, they're burning too much carbon and too much cash the older they get, so we need to get them off the fleet, and we need to get ordering new ones as quickly as we can. For replacement of those 7 vehicles, we have £1.6 million that's already been approved as part of the capital programme. Our trucks are supplied by Dennis Eagle, and many members will know that they're what we call narrow-body trucks. So we have lots of tight, narrow, densely populated streets in Worcester, so we need the Dennis Eagle narrow-body trucks. And Appendix 1 has provided a couple of photographs showing how our drivers need to manoeuvre through those streets every day, and why those trucks are so important. So the preferred option of this report is to bring forward the procurement of those trucks because of that lead-in time, so we can get them ordered and we can get them on site as early as we possibly can. We've received a quote from Dennis Eagle to directly purchase the vehicles, and we've been offered a considerable discount given that we've been utilising them for some time. In terms of alternative options, as I said, the reason we use Dennis Eagle trucks is because of their narrow-bodied shape. That's essential to us. But there's also an importance of maintaining the relationship with Dennis Eagle because of the maintenance of the trucks and the sort of skill and expertise that has been continued to be developed there. We've looked at prices via a framework route, and that's certainly demonstrated that the best price can be obtained by purchasing directly from the manufacturer, and legal colleagues have given us assurance around that as well from a procurement point of view. I think the really important thing to stress, particularly tonight, is that even though we're asking to procure diesel trucks, there is an awful lot of work that's currently ongoing by officers sat within this room around getting us as early as possible to be able to procure electric trucks as soon as possible. That work is actively underway. We are hoping, more than hoping, we will be in a position to be able to procure electric trucks from 25-26. There's still much to learn, to understand about electric RCVs and how they'd work in Worcester, relating to payload, the actual mileage the vehicles can commit to, and whether they're sufficient for our day-to-day operation, because it isn't just about operating in the streets of Worcester, it's trundling out to Norton, it's trundling out to Hartlebury as well, to offload. The price of electric vehicles at the moment is considerably higher. We are looking at a diesel truck of £230,000. Currently, electric trucks are in the region of £450,000 to £500,000. And the trucks that Dennis Eagle offer from an electric point of view, they currently don't benefit from any grant aid. So again, these are the sorts of things that we need to work through before we can come back to members and put in front of you a paper that talks about electric trucks and how we can procure them. But just to reassure, there is lots of work going on, and we will get there as soon as we possibly can. What we are going to look to do in the meantime is that obviously having the newer trucks on board, they'll be Euro 6 vehicles, so they'll automatically be cleaner in terms of emissions. But our near neighbours across the border in Malvern, they are looking at utilising biodiesel or biofuel in some of their trucks, and we are also going to look at how that's being played out, and for us to be able to replicate that or learn from it and do something of our own in Worcester as soon as we can. And if members are minded to approve this report tonight, the saving that can be achieved from procuring directly with Dennis, we'd look to use that saving to put towards that trial. The other option we looked at is leasing rather than purchasing, but 4.6 will clearly set out to you that the leasing option over that 5, 6 or 7 year period is far more expensive than purchasing directly. So in terms of financial implications, 23-24 and 24-25, as I say, there's provision within the capital programme to be able to purchase the purchase cost of those trucks. But if we directly purchase with Dennis Eagle through a procurement framework, we will save ourselves in the region of £70,000, which we then look to utilise for that biodiesel trial. The table in 5.1 really just hopefully sets out to members the financial impact of continuing to operate these older vehicles. So you'll see there the 15 and 16 plated vehicles, the column around difference. That's how much is being spent, past that sort of five-year life. And the majority of that is what we call non-scheduled maintenance. So they're not the sort of, the once or twice a year, pulled into the garage because we know they need to be tested in terms of warranties and those sorts of things. These are the unknowns. These are the things that Derek and colleagues are being faced with every day just because of the age of the trucks, and we're having to deal with to keep them on the road. And just in terms of risk implications, like I say, the key risk really is that if we don't get on and procure now, those older trucks are going to remain on site with us. They will cost us more money, they will burn more carbon, and with that lead-in time at the moment, we need to get orders placed. So the risk is not being able to place that order quickly, and us being able to battle on with older trucks. Chair, that is probably enough from me at that point, so more than happy to move into questions.
Richard?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a few concerns about this report. It's a lot of money which is being asked for and not a lot of information provided, even though I hear what's been said. I think to justify spending this kind of money, I think we would need some sort of information on the current condition of the current fleet to see whether it could actually have an extension of its life, and whether the cost of borrowing would actually, and paying the interest payments, would actually be more than the cost of maintenance. That needs to be a consideration in itself. So I have got a few concerns, wondering whether we're not being asked to do this prematurely and we could have some more requests for information. What I would like to suggest is that, we'd be more minded to agree this, but come back to the next Environment Committee to discuss this in more detail after after there's been a all-party task and finish group to look at the issues involved here, to examine the costs, to examine alternatives, examine the issues involved, and come back with a recommendation for us to move forward. I understand the issues about time pressure, and that could cost us money, but doing this just for the sake of doing it, because the vehicles are up for replacement in the near future, is not the reason to do it. We need to have a bit more evidence to confirm that there is an issue which does require replacement.
Can I?
Can I go back, Chair? Chair, I do take umbrage at the comment about doing it for the sake of doing it. These are trucks which are 6 and 7 years old. And the industry standard for retaining a refuse truck is 7 years old. I think the report sets out the increasing amount of costs, particularly non-planned costs, in keeping these trucks on the road. And the environmental argument is quite clear as well. The older they get, the more inefficient they get in terms of burning fuel. What we do have is that within the capital programme, this is already funded for. And I absolutely take Councillor Udall's point about doing this early. The only reason we are asking to procure them early is because of that lead-in time. And if we miss that slot, it's going to push us further back down the queue, if that makes sense. So apologies if I didn't make those points clear enough at the as part of my presentation, Chair. But this really is about the lead-in time. And if we miss this slot now, you know, we're going to have older trucks on the fleet, which are going to cause us more problems.
And would we have some flexibility in deferring this issue until January, when we next meet, to enable us as members to give this a bit more extra scrutiny and look at it in a bit more detail and come back with, yes, proceed, or look at it a different way in January? I don't want to rush into something, even though I understand completely what's being suggested here, but I do think this needs to be a bit more member involvement than what has currently been having.
Can I just reiterate that point? Everything in this report is geared for us to make an instant decision here tonight. You understand? And I'm really uncomfortable with the fact that we have to make a decision. And you know, you put in there that because of the time frame, and you've also put in there that actually the price is only going to be held for 30 days as well. That's putting a lot of pressure on this committee to make a decision for 1.6 million, which certainly members from this side of the group are really uncomfortable with.
Chair, just to reiterate, and Shane may want to comment as well from a capital programme point of view. So in our capital programme, a decision has already been made by this council as part of that capital programme to replace our trucks every 7 years. That's been a decision that's already been taken, and there is provision within the capital programme to provide that. So all this report is seeking is to make that decision a little bit earlier. It's not going to cost us any more. We're just looking to make the decision earlier so we can get ourselves in the queue for these trucks, which brings the older trucks off the fleet. So I don't know whether Shane wants to comment any further than that on me.
Through you, Chairs, I wouldn't add to that. No, I mean, the situation at the moment is that we have that commitment of a little over. It's more than 1.5, isn't it? Plus the 73. So there's an additional amount. All this report, in essence, is doing is asking to bring forward the year 2 group into year 1. So we buy them all at once rather than over 2 years. And if we do that, we will receive a discount of 73,000. That's the offer that's on the table from Dennis Eagle. We have to go to Dennis Eagle to buy these trucks. They're the only supplier which provide these particular vehicles. So the commitment of 1.5 million is already made. We're not asking members to commit to spending 1.5 million. That's already been made. What we're asking for is to bring forward the second year's worth of vehicles into the first year so we can obtain a discount for that purchase. That's essentially what the report is asking for.
Thank you. Simon.
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to echo the concerns that have already been made to a degree. And I don't think it's inappropriate in the current economic climate to be taking this opportunity to just have a look at the figures involved. 1.65 million. My question is, how much would it cost per year to carry on patching up these old vehicles with it in mind to just run the things into the ground and throw them away. And alongside that, is there any view about how quickly the cost of electric replacement vehicles will be reducing in price? At the moment, I see figures, we're looking at 235,000 to replace these with vehicles which will be obsolete in a short number of years. So we're going to have to throw them away in any case, against 450, which is a considerable hike in price to buy electric vehicles. That presumably is not going to remain at that level. Do you have any view about whether that cost is gradually reducing? And if it is, does that lend a certain amount of logic to delaying this process rather than hastening it? I'm really uncomfortable about spending a huge amount of money on what is basically obsolete technology already. We still have to use it because the new technology hasn't developed to the point where it's economically viable. But if there's any way that we can hold off and put ourselves in a better position to go straight to electric vehicles, there's the sense in that, I think, deserves exploring. I like Richard's suggestion that we set up a task and finish group. Given the amount of money that we're looking at, I do think it's our responsibility to take our decision with as much care as possible. I know the money's already been put on one side, but until it's spent, then it's still our money.
I just wanted to make a comment, if I could, about Councillor Crone's point about running the vehicles into the ground, which is something I've done with my own car over the years, and it is a in that world it's a legitimate way of running things. Members with long memories may remember we have some direct experience of that in this council. When I came to the council in 2011, we didn't have a fleet replacement programme fully costed and developed. One of my regrets is it wasn't the thing I did in my first week when I came here. And there was a time at which our overspend on vehicle maintenance was in the hundreds of thousands of pounds for one particular year. There's also an enormous knock-on effect in downtime for the operation. So it's a legitimate point. I just want to reflect back to members some personal experience from this council. It caused us some very, very big problems. And what I was new to at that time and didn't realise is the wear and tear on those vehicles is enormous. The bodies actually wear out from the scraping in the back of the refuse being pulled around, as well as all the various parts. And it comes to a point where everything's breaking and the thing's in the garage, almost as much as it's out on the road. So you have to be very, very careful about adopting that strategy.
Derek, just give me, Derek, just to add, thank you, David. Just to add to that as well, one of the big drivers for us is to reduce waste and increase recycling. And I personally think it's very important for our trucks to be ambassadors for the council. To be bright, to be shiny, to be clean, to be giving off the right message. And I've known and I've worked in authorities where recycling rates are low, and people will look at recycling trucks and they'll make their own mind up about how serious the council are in terms of investing in this area. So I'll just add that to David's point as well. I'll let Derek pick up the point around what the market's looking like in terms of the price of electric vehicles and whether there's any change.
For your question on maintenance, I've got a report today, one truck, just one truck out of 21 has cost already, just for maintenance and breakdowns, 20 grand since April, and I've still got 6 months to go, and that's even going to get replaced for another 2 years. Today, I had 4 trucks down, so 4 trucks can't go out and collect refuge, so it's becoming a massive problem. On the 14th of November this month, we're getting our first demonstration, an electric truck. So when I inquired about the electric truck in June, it was £400,000. I inquired 6 weeks ago, and it's went up to 450,000 per truck. Exactly identical to what we're driving now, identical. And that price ain't coming down, that's gone up. And by 2030, all councils have to be electric. So it's not just Worcester City who's applying for to get these, it's every authority in the country and worldwide. So if we miss our slot, we could be 2 years down the line. I don't know. But that slot that we've got now is 52 weeks. So the electric truck that we're getting in November, we'll get it for a week, and it's only got an 80-kilometre range. So it's 50 mile. And at the moment, we don't know if it can do any run, no matter all the runs. Because it has to leave the depot, go to the run, do the run, go to the dump, come back to the run, do another part of the run, then back to the dump, then back to the depot. And we don't know if that's going to cover any of the area. So it is trial and error. I agree, yeah, we'll try everything to do what we can do. But last week, I went to Malvern Hills to see about this, the hydro oil, and they've this is their 3rd week on it. So last week it was 2 weeks, and they're doing exactly the same, just putting it straight into the trucks. So these 7 trucks that could be coming, I don't have to do nothing with it. Instead of putting diesel in it, I just put the oil in it. And the only thing about the oil, it's 17 pence a litre more expensive than diesel. And it's actually half, if not more, the carbon footprint. So.
Thanks for that. I mean, I just want to step in a sec and say a few things, because can I just, I'm started, so well, you've had a long answer. Myself and Karen, as chair and vice chair, obviously this paper was raised with us at our chairs and vice chairs briefing, and we did put through a lot of challenges, like have been coming out this evening, and so we have had say longer discussions and a time to reflect, and this is replenishing the fleet is almost effectively normal business for this council. It's something that happens on a regular basis. These trucks wear out and they need to be replaced. The money's in the capital programme. This is not something one-off, something unusual that needs a task and finish group. The expertise is around the table, actually in vast numbers, because David, obviously, although not in the role now, was very much in the role previously. So I personally, I don't see the benefit of a task and finish group. We know we have a commitment to go to zero emission in the future. That technology is not here, and is not here in a practical sense, nor in a financially viable sense. We know these trucks have a pathway to becoming 90% reduced carbon emissions through the trial that's going on in Malvern. We have a procurement slot that we can lose, which with the current supply chain issues across the whole world are now 52 weeks. If we miss this slot, we don't know when we'll be able to take delivery of these trucks. And so not only will we lose the discount, we'll have to go out and explain to our residents why their bins aren't being collected, because our existing fleet are breaking down and in the garage for maintenance, as well as pumping out more CO2 and more emissions than these new trucks. So I just want to get some of those out before we start kicking the can down the table. The expertise are here. This is normal business for this council, but we also are looking to the future. So I just wanted to say that.
Yes, I'll just go back to the questions I asked, which was, I know it's difficult to answer it, but in general terms, I wanted to know what would be the cost per year of patching these up. And you've given us a sort of horror story of £20,000 bill for a vehicle, which is quite shocking to repair a vehicle. But if you set that against the cost of £235,000 for a new vehicle, if we were even going to be facing £20,000 every year for every vehicle to keep these going long enough that the electric vehicles had reduced in price, and that was a viable option. This is the point that I'm trying to get in my head, because I just want to find a way that I can be absolutely comfortable about saying yes to spending £1.65 million in the present horrible economic climate. That's the point, really, of the question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the point I'd make there is that, you know, if you depreciate the cost of a truck over 5 or 6 years at £230,000, I think that would probably roughly equate to the cost that it's currently costing us in unplanned maintenance for the truck. The trucks are going to be more efficient, so they'll probably use, you know, less fuel, which will cost us a bit less. And they'll be greener in their credentials. So again, I absolutely take Councillor Cronin's point. It makes absolute sense of the question. We don't have exact figures with this tonight, but I think there'll be very little in it. But if anything, it'll be positive.
I think it's also worth adding that on top of maintenance costs, it's availability. If your truck's in the garage, it's not emptying bins. Stephen, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Yes, I've looked at this report. I must admit, I wish it's been written a bit clearer. But I'm going to take a pragmatic view on this. On that, I believe we have to base our decisions on what is available now. And we're at a very difficult stage at the moment for vehicle pricing because of worldwide procurement problems. I know I've got to wait about 6-7 months for an electric car I've ordered because of the production issues in Germany in terms of getting them produced and that. But at least by buying them now, I've held them to a price on that, because obviously inflation is looming, and the cost of these vehicles is not going to get any more. I think it's very important that we actually give our crews the equipment they need to do the job properly, because, you know, if brands are failed because vehicles are failing, that is not good for our customers, the people who have their bins collected and that. So it is difficult because obviously electric vehicles are coming in for 2030, and the technology regarding refuse collection vehicles that are all electric isn't quite there yet. And the cost of a totally electrical vehicle, as this report says, is £450,000, which is really beyond the actual remit in that. I would actually say we should probably accept this. I mean, to understand about the hydro-treated vegetable oil trial, obviously if these vehicles can be future fitted with that, I think that's very important. I work for a major supermarket chain, and most of the trucks we operate have been modified for biofuels and that. So that definitely does make a difference in terms of our carbon footprint and that. So we can mitigate it in the short term while this is happening. I mean, what we have to understand is this will probably be the last fleet of this type we will buy, because when we come to our next round of purchase, replace this, we will then be looking at electric vehicles, and the actual technology in that will actually be in existence. And I think that if we delayed this, we really would be failing our our delivery crews, we would be potentially costing the authority more money. And I think we just have to be pragmatic on things. Yes, we'd love to replace it with electric vehicles or something from day one and that, but they aren't. But they aren't available. We aren't going to get them in the time frames we've got. I think we've got a reasonable price here. I think we should just go with the deal.
Thank you, Stephen. And I think it's also worth bearing in mind that this is 7 vehicles of a fleet of 14. So these will come in as new, they'll have their life, but before these vehicles run through their lifespan, there'll be another tranche of vehicles that will be coming to the end of their life in a few years' time, that then would be the ones that could be replaced first with electric vehicles. So Stephen, sorry, was saying that this is probably be the last ones. So I've got Jabba next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. One, you've pointed out earlier that this company is the only company that can manufacture these products. Hence, why we're tied in with them to a certain extent. Is that actually true? Have we looked elsewhere? And how have we managed to get around that OJU process in terms of that? And how do we know we're getting value for money on that? In terms of, I understand the arguments. I mean, logistics is the same as we procure vehicles all the time. We've got Dennis Dixon's, we use Motus, Arthur Spriggs, all the local companies that fix them. So I know the maintenance costs of some of the older vehicles in terms of that. We've procured 20, 30 vehicles over the last 2-3 years. Some of them have not still arrived yet in terms of when we ordered them because of parts and availability. I don't believe that 12-month timescales is accurate. Can you, I mean, how much of a guarantee is it that we'll get them within the 12 months as well?
So just around the procurement point, yeah, absolutely. Dennis Eagle are the only manufacturer of narrow body trucks. That's why you see them being provided up and down the country, particularly in urban areas. And we're not, this is the reason why we brought this to committee. There's no procurement exemption here. We will use a pre-procured procurement framework to do that. So it's open and transparent. But because of that unique, ask of Worcester and the narrow body truck, that's why we will be able to direct the award to Dennis if members are minded to approve the report. Do you want to pick up the 12-month lead-in time?
When I got the quote from Dennis, at that time, it was 52 weeks. Maybe a bit quicker, but that's what they said. With the current climate, with all the shortages worldwide, we'll put 52 weeks. That's, I only can go by what they told me.
Thank you. Finally, I remember when Hartlebury opened, one of the big selling points for Hartlebury and us moving operations was that it would save on a lot of maintenance for our vehicles over there. How much has it actually saved then in terms of the wear and tear on our vehicles? Selling points.
But we're talking maintenance for a year per truck. So at the minute, as I say, that truck now is about 20 grand, and I've still got another 6 months of the financial year to go, and that's
fine. And have you got the breakdown of figures of how much each truck has costed us from year one? Because it'd be interesting to see, because obviously you've put in a total figure in your report, but I want to see what it cost at year one and individually 2, 3. So we could do the calculations.
I could get you an update for that.
We've not included a cost profile within this report, Chair. What we've included is the sort of the block cost. We can provide that outside the committee if that would be of use to members.
Probably just, Chair, just to make a comment, just to echo what Councillor Riaz has said about the move away from the landfill site, and we did get some quite horrendous problems of our RCVs have effectively having to go off-road across a landfill site, mattresses wrapped around the prop shaft, staff having to sort of dig them out, dig underneath to get underneath them. So we don't have direct costs about that, but it was a big service improvement and financial saving and a relief to all of the staff, I think, when we moved away from that and were able to spend all of our time on tarmac.
Thank you. Owen, got you.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I don't really understand the need of the talk for a task and finish group, because we're not in control of the price. By the time the task and finish group's finished, it's 70 grand more. To me, that seems pointless. For me, there's a task and finish group right there. When we're done. There's a ready-made task and finish group in Mr. Keenan. And I'm taking on board what he's telling us here. If we wait for a task and finish group for us to sit around and talk about this, it's going to cost us 70 grand more. And then we've still got to buy the same trucks because the electric ones are £500,000 each. So I really don't see what we're hesitating over here, and I'm happy to propose this.
Yeah. Thank you, Aaron. Ready, and then I'll come back. So
Yeah, I just want.
Sorry.
I wanted to make. I mean, why are we in this position to make that choice right this at the time? We would have known this maybe 6 months ago, or at an earlier meeting to give us a longer time to lead into this decision.
I've got you, Marjorie, but it's
When I saw this report at the pre-meeting, I was also asking questions about why aren't we procuring 7 electric vehicles, because obviously that is the ambition of the council. But the other thing to realise, not only is the cost of the vehicle, it's the fact that we are not experienced in how they'll operate in the city, but also we currently don't have the infrastructure for charging them. And that will be an additional cost, which we haven't actually got either. So procuring these vehicles now protects the collection of refuse around the city. I was at the depot today and there were 4 vehicles that needed repair. And, you know, if we end up not collecting rubbish, the risk of the reputation to our city, you see that in other places in the country, it's something that really upsets residents. We can't afford that risk. I think what Malvern have done with the investigating the oil, you know, the alternative oil, the fact that we can get a 90% reduction in our air pollution is absolutely great. The £70,000 saving will allow us to do that. And it's not only the vehicles that we're getting, but some of the vehicles we've got, I believe, can also have that oil as well. And so therefore we'll actually have the opportunity to change the whole fleet away from diesel if we go down this route now, which obviously gives us a very early change to our air pollution, which if we wait for the electric vehicles, we've also got to do the infrastructure for charging them. And we're just not there yet. We just haven't got that information. We don't know how we're going to do it. That's as far as I understand it. Thank you.
Marjorie, thank you for your patience.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair. I think it's regrettable that we can't go electric now, but we just have to face the situation we're in. The time isn't right. Hopefully it will be right by the time when we come to purchase more vehicles. I think we just have to remind ourselves that we had plans to buy 4 next year and 3 the year after, and what we're doing here is putting the 7 into a package. And by doing that, we're also saving a considerable amount of money, which is important in the current climate. I'd like to know, will these be the last fossil fuel vehicles that we purchase? And therefore, is there a plan for further replacements? You know, do we know what we're going to do the year after that, and so on and so forth? But aside from needing that, from liking to have that information, I think that the proposal in this report is the right one to go for, and I'd be voting for it.
Thank you, Marjorie.
Yeah, the work I referred to earlier that's currently being carried out, Chair, at some stage sooner rather than later, we would want to bring a paper back to this committee that would make a recommendation onto Council for a change to the capital programme, basically, that works in the procurement of electric trucks rather than diesel trucks. So, yeah, next year, I think we'll be in a position to bring a report back to this committee that sets out what that will look like.
Okay, so I'll go to Zoe because she's not spoken yet.
Although I have had my hand up a number of times. I just wanted to echo something that Stephen said in relation to something that you also said. I actually think a lot of this debate is totally unnecessary. As Stephen said, we're going with a report that is incredibly light with very little information that we're trying to make a judgment on. Hence, as a group, we're asking lots and lots of questions that we're trying to understand. And as you said, as the chair and the vice chair, you've had the conversation, you've been to the depot, you've had the advantage of having all of these conversations. And therefore, you can say, yes, you're happy to support this. So can I just make an appeal that if we don't want to have to spend the time reinventing the wheel, having these conversations, can we make sure that those informations in future are put in the reports? You take, for example, the goal report, which was very comprehensive and very, very detailed, which meant that we could all happily go, yes, we understand that and we know the issues and therefore we can all vote on this. This one is so light, we ended up with a lot of questions, which have generally been answered in the course of this debate. So just an appeal of, please put that in writing so that we don't have to go through all of this again.
I will, though. I think it's a fair point. That you know, the more information the reports have, the better.
Zoe's basically said what I was going to say. I think you've made the point that you didn't see the point or any benefit in having a task and finish group. Well, you would say that you've been through all the scrutiny in advance. We haven't. You said that the expertise is here. Well, the accountability is here. And we have to be accountable for the decisions we make here in this meeting. What I'm actually asking for is more involvement with this group in pre-determination scrutiny before items come to the agenda like they have done today. So we can be party to those discussions in advance. We keep on being told we've got no overall control on this authority. So let's work together to actually achieve these kind of results so we don't have these discussions, so we are satisfied in advance that the recommendations which we have in front of us are acceptable to us. So if we can have further leniency in that area, that would be helpful for us in the future to understand what is being suggested, so we don't have to go down this road of public scrutiny in advance of a meeting, which is asking questions which we would hope have been previously asked by others.
Thank you. Jabba?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I've never dreamt of the day when the Greens would agree to something, you know, a diesel vehicle. So, I mean, miracles do happen in terms of, I think they understand the reality in terms of what you're saying in terms of the costs of it. But what I would stress is that if we can look at alternative fuels, whether that's biodiesel, whether it's biomethane, in terms of that converting technology, that may be able to help us in terms of achieve that net zero target. As you said, Chair, we've had a brilliant environmental climate conference here, and you know, it just seems that we're taking a negative step towards that if we're not considering the full possibilities.
Okay, Karen?
I'd just like to say that the fact that there is a green in the room at the pre-meeting is the fact that there is biofuel in this report. And that was my influence when looking at what happened in Malvern. And that means that we will not be using diesel in these vehicles because they don't have to be diesel at any point. Thank you.
Okay, if everybody's finished with their questions and comments, I'd like to move to a vote on the recommendation as laid out in the paper at 1.1. So can I see all those in favour? Thank you very much. I think that's unanimous. Yep. Thank you very much. On to agenda item 7, which is the action plan for the second phase of delivery of the environmental sustainability strategy. So is it Claire or David?
Yeah, I'll take the report, Chair, and Claire will answer all the difficult questions as usual. So this report brings to the committee an updated action plan to support delivery of the sustainability strategy. It also takes the opportunity to give you information on the City Council's carbon footprint and the carbon footprint for the city, and then asks that the committee considers adding a one-off enabling budget into the reserves to go into the budget process for next year, and delegates authority to make some amendments to the plan to Chair and Vice Chair, as has been the current practice. So members will be aware of our approval of our strategy, and the current action plan was approved back in March 21. An enabling budget of 100,000 was allocated to support delivery of the plan. At the previous meeting, we had an update on progress against the plan, and you'll see there's a lot still to do, but a lot of progress has been made, a lot of actions have been carried out. The budget of 100,000 has been fully allocated, and there's details of that within the report. So at Appendix 2 is a revision of the plan for 2022, and I'll briefly touch on some of the highlights as I go through the report. So taking you to Section 3, the details are in there and in the appendix around the City Council's direct carbon emissions. Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions are the direct emissions. There has been a reduction compared to 2021, a larger reduction compared to 1920. Members will appreciate the lockdown period. There was a decrease in emissions across the board, really. So it's still a reduction from that period, but a small reduction since then. Our heating consumption did reduce in 21-22 compared to the previous 12 months. And a note that all of the electricity that we use now is from green renewable sources, that we purchased that through the National Grid, but that is renewable electricity. And we're continuing to look at sustainable, affordable alternatives to gas to power council buildings in the future. I think there's probably a parallel conversation to the one that's just been had about where the future takes us with that. There's a note to the fleet, which, as we know, is a large contributor. I think we've probably been through the issues around that. There is a commitment within the proposed action plan, and work is underway to do a detailed business case. And I think the work is to find out how we introduce electric vehicles to the city, and when, not if. So for the first time in this report, we've calculated carbon emissions from our leisure centres as part of our carbon footprint. As you'll expect, those are a considerable contribution to the council's carbon footprint. The swimming pool in particular, of course, as a high energy demand. Freedom's undertaken a number of energy saving and emission reducing actions. We need to work more closely with them now going forward. And there is a proposed feasibility study to assess the costs and potential to install solar generation at Purdeswell Leisure Centre that would offset and reduce the need for us to take energy from the National Grid to run that centre. Then moving to Section 4, there's information there around Worcester as a city. That's a little bit more of a lag on the reporting of that information. So published in summer of this year was the published by government with the 2020 figures. So there's some lag there. It is showing a downward trend and reduction. 4.2 and figure 2 illustrates that since 2005, over that 15-year period, emissions for the city as a whole have halved. And a direction of travel, were you to purely extrapolate that, would take us down towards around carbon neutral by around 2035. I mean, clearly there are a lot of variables around that. It's a very crude projection, but we thought it was one that was useful to sort of give you some sort of context in this report. And the main emissions, 41% is around homes, 30% transport, and then industry. If you look at figure 3 in Appendix 1, Worcester's per head emissions are reasonably low compared to the rest of our neighbours. We don't have major trunk roads running through the city, so that is a considerable contributor So Wychavon, for instance, has a large section of the M5, and that adds to their emissions. So there are a number of active travel-related measures in the action plan, when we come to that, designed to reduce transport emissions by offering other options. Those will have a valuable impact, albeit a relatively small impact. And just to set the context there, if you look at nationally, the phasing out of all new petrol and diesel cars by 2030 and hybrids by 2035, that is where the significant impact will be made on transport emissions, but it's not to belittle what we will be doing around active travel, which is important. I won't go through the entire action plan. Some of the headlines are there at section 5. So plans around reducing carbon emissions from our estate, the creation of an electric vehicle charging strategy for Worcester. The report that follows this one touches on that a little bit more, and an initial investment that we're asking the committee to approve in our car parks. Touches on the fleet again. Members will be aware of the public bike hire scheme that's included in the town investment plan. Works underway on that. We've had the city's first car club has been launched, and the action plan will supporting expansion of that where we can, and working with operators and residents to increase that. Continue with the Green Homes grants support that's been really successful in the city. Some work around biodiversity. We're looking at an enhanced marketing and operational plans to try and drive up our recycling rates, working with Sandra and Derek and colleagues. And underpinning this really is an engagement programme around sustainability and social media. So touching on the funding, we will also seek opportunities for grant aid wherever possible. We've tried to use the budget as an enabling budget to lever in other funds. And I think some of our previous actions, we've managed to gather in other funding and been able to save money on our own enabling budget. I'll refer to the AUKS fund in the following report. But what we're asking you to put forward here into the budget process is a budget of 150,000 to support the Sustainability Action Programme. A number of actions to support will be decarbonisation of our buildings, some further engagement, and continuing a relatively small element, but the Environmental Community Grants Programme. And there was a presentation of that at the Environmental Sustainability Summit. It supported a lot of communities and young people in some ways dipping their toes into environmental issues, and getting involved in that for relatively small cost to the council. There's a note there that actually the action plan is a live document. It will be updated and amended as time goes on. Wherever possible, that will fit within the schedule for this committee. Occasionally an opportunity arises, and as previously, we're asking to continue that delegation to chair and vice chair to be able to approve those things, so we can take advantage of grant bids or awards that might arise, and we may need to spend some money to facilitate that. So the implications are there within the report. As I said, also appended is the revised action plan itself. There's some commentary in there on actions that have been completed, actions that are carried forward, and some new actions. So those are highlighted for you. I've had the opportunity to have a look at those. I won't go through them now, but very happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Zoe?
So it actually links quite well to the last item. Happy with the content and the process, and clearly this is a very important piece of work. But I do have a little bit of concern about one of the points in 9.2. So just to explain my concern, I really welcome the fact that you've said this is a live document, and I think that's absolutely right. And also that it will be subject to approvals at the Environment Committee. However, in 9.2, you say that's going to be twice yearly. And really, I don't think that's going to be enough for us to really understand what's happening in the development. So I'd like to suggest that instead of it just being a twice yearly report, that we actually have this as a standing item on the Environment Committee, so we can actually understand what's happening and what's being approved. And that would certainly make me much more comfortable with the idea of delegating to the chair and vice chair to be able to make those decisions as an interim, because it would then only be the things which need a decision between Environment Committees, which we fully recognise may need to happen.
So the performance scorecard, the quarterly performance scorecard is on Environment Committee. So a number of those actions will be reported against that. I think it's important to note that not all of the actions are being progressed at the same time. So there are 34 from memory actions there. I'm pleased to say that our active travel environmental sustainability officer started today. So we've now got, we've got a team of 2 working on us in office. Obviously, we're working on these actions across the whole of the council. I think what we've sought to do at the 6 monthly report is to actually have quite a long narrative. So Claire's put a considerable amount of time into producing a really informative report, and I hope that members found that really useful at the last committee. I would be reluctant to commit in this committee. We can take our own look at it to do a similar report to every committee meeting. I think that would be a large amount of work to commit officers to, or it may end up being just a little bit repetitive for members because we're regurgitating. So could I take the point away and have a think about it? But those are my first thoughts.
I'm happy for you to, yeah, I'm more than happy with that. I mean, I'm not asking necessarily that you give us a detailed report, but an update for every Environment Committee on what's happened, what the new developments are. Surely that's something that you're on top of anyway.
We could take that away with the chair and think about the format for that. And the quarterly performance scorecard is there for you, and we'll look at the commentary on that.
Thank you. Jabba?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to reinforce that point, Chair. I mean, we've declared a climate emergency. One of the criticisms that we've faced has that, you know, and we've declared it, and we haven't really kind of got behind the message. It's not on our websites. It's not in any of our sort of immediate follow-up plans. And what Zoe's suggestion really does is actually highlight that the importance of it, that we tackle it at each and every meeting, hence the request.
I think it was debated at the time, and I think it was a balance between officers not just permanently working on reports and have time to delivering the actions. And we do have as I said, we have got the quarterly report in every meeting that has a lot of the key actions.
Yeah, we have declared a climate emergency, so that does, I think, warrant some regular reporting back more than twice a year. So it's obviously something which has been said that you'll look at in more detail and come back to us. But I would hope you would accept this suggestion and in the spirit it's asked for, that we're just simply asking to support you in your role. Two questions which come to mind from reading this report is, I would love us to be a little bit more imaginative about ways in which we can actually assist with the programme. First of all, I noticed we haven't had today the report about air monitoring equipment, which was agreed by Licensing Committee a couple of weeks ago. That was due to come to in the Environment Committee. It isn't yet here. Just seeking information as to where that report has gone to. And secondly, I do wonder whether it is time to use this as an opportunity to seek some more feasibility studies into how we can use the River Severn through the city to generate electricity and power. I know Worcester was the first municipality in the world to generate hydroelectric power at Powick Mills. So there is opportunities there, especially at the weir for turbines, and even for heat sourcing to take place in the riverbed. So I do wonder whether we can actually add to this report a request for a feasibility study to see how that can actually happen in the future, to see what we can do as a city council to enable it and to support other partners to ensure it can happen, which would actually feed revenue back to the city council and others, and also generate green electricity in the forthcoming green revolution.
Do you want to take the air quality?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just in respect of the referral report from Licensing and Environmental Health Committee, that will come to the January Environment Committee, so it can be considered against all the other budget items. Yeah.
So on the other 2 points on the River Severn, I'll ask David if he wants to comment.
Thank you. So there is an action which is about investigating heat networks, and we've been working with colleagues nationally and locally, being led by the acronym escapes me actually at the moment. There's a chap called Alex Pearson who's hosted by the LEP, does a lot of work around this and has been progressing feasibility studies on a heat network. So we've participated in that. That would be energy recovery from the River Severn in forms of a heat exchanger. And there's two bits to a project, and then the second part would be the heat network, which can be powered by any energy source, a heat network. And we've had an initial piece of work done that he's led on, and it's something that we shared with the chair and vice chair. The feasibility study is something that will be probably £150,000 piece of work. It's a very detailed piece of work. Fortunately, it's something there is grant funding available for. Other partners are being engaged. If it's felt right, then to invest significant council money, we'd clearly come back to this committee to look for some partner funding for that.
Thank you, Chair. That's very useful information, which I wasn't aware of. I do wonder then if we can ask our officers to come back to give us a report on opportunities which may exist to use the River Severn as an energy generation mechanism for the future, whether it is heat source or whether it is turbines on the river, on the weir, which could actually generate electricity. I'm not asking for a report at the next meeting, but something which can happen in the near future, which enables us to look at options and see what grants are available to actually enable those kind of feasibility studies to happen. I'm hearing a lot of people saying, why aren't we using this kind of power which is running through our city? And this is an opportunity to actually start the process.
Thank you. Do we any more questions? Sorry, Jabba and Mark.
On EV charging, is there any hope of bringing about on-street EV charging for residents who don't have drives?
So the on-street element sort of falls within the remit of the County Council and Highways, and we are talking to County Council officers. And I know some work's been done on initial data collection, so I think there's a piece of work underway up the road at County Hall. We talk about an EV charging strategy, and I think we will look to engage partners to see how broad that strategy can be. Our initial strategy will be around what we can control. So our car parks and the following report focuses on that, but certainly something we're talking to county officers about.
Jabba?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, Marjorie's made part of the point that I wanted to make, and obviously looking into, I mean, not just only our car parks, but our community centres and other communal places out in the city where we can make charging easier. I mean, that's really essential in the coming years. I mean, more to the point, I think it's a moment to kind of just sit back a little bit and just reflect on how far we've come over the last couple of years in terms of our ambitions, and there's a comprehensive list of actions that we've managed to come up with in terms of dealing with that. Obviously, there's a hell of a lot more to do in order to achieve our total ambitions, but I think we should really just look at where we've come and, just appreciate all the officer time and effort that's been put in to help us achieve that, and that as collectively, as a committee and as a council, that we've taken this threat really seriously and we've got a plan going forward. So thank you for everybody.
Thank you for that. And to say we've got the next paper is on EV chargers, which would be in our own car parks, but focused in residential or near to residential areas where residents have little off-road parking. And there is an action in the plan which will talk about the following phase, which would be looking at the potential for putting EV chargers in leisure centre car parks and community centres, so we're spreading them around the city. Is there anything else you wanted?
I thought, Chair, might just be helpful just to reflect on the role of the steering group. So there's and you may wish to say some words up. There's a member steering group that's helped off. So this isn't just an officer document that's been brought to you. Thank you to the members on the steering group. That's really useful. And I think that's an important way to engage members, because there's a lot of work's gone into this, and I can see that all members are very, very interested in. But to engage everybody on everything will be a huge amount of draw on all of your time.
And I mean, I've been vice chair or chair of this committee now for 4 years, and that steering committee was set up right at the beginning after the emergency was declared, and that's always been cross-party, and that's always worked really well with the various members that have been on it. Okay.
Are you accepting my request for a report to come to a future committee about the River Severn?
I was hoping David was going to say a bit more about the electrical generation, because I think that's been around and been looked at, and it is of low feasibility. But there is, as you said, very extensive reports on the heat pump, and that was shared with chair and vice chair when the vice chair was held by Tom Collins. So it has been available to your group, and this is it's a 100-page technical document. There isn't anything. Do you want to take over? Yeah.
If it might be helpful, I think, I mean, having looked at the heat network feasibility report, there's a first phase and the second phase, and I've given members some indication of the sort of the cost and complexity. For us to commission a feasibility report into a hydroelectric plant, is potentially an enormous and costly piece of work. I think if members are comfortable with this, what we could do is just try and summarise in a report to members outside of the committee, to members of this committee, rather than bringing I don't think it would be a decision report, and I'm not sure I could get enough meat in the report to make it worthy of your committee time, but maybe do that as a precursor and then see where you wanted to take it from there, if that was helpful.
I would be happy for any report to come to explain the situation and the problems relating to it, because I think it's a very important issue and it has got a lot of public interest. So to enable us to actually respond to that public interest, that kind of paper would be useful.
Okay, then, if everyone's happy with that? Yeah, so basically an information paper. Yeah. Cool. Any more questions, comments? So on that basis, then, are we happy to? Well, I'll just reiterate 1.3. So as well as approving the updates to the plan, we're also requesting £150,000, which would be a budget predominantly controlled by this committee, like the previous 100k that we had that we spent over a period of 18 months. Did you want to say something, Javed?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can we just clarify that 150 grand? You've stated that it's an enabling 150 grand, but can we just be clear? Does that mean off a resource in terms of a head to make that happen, or to allocate within that budget?
So what happened with the previous £100,000 was that as opportunities came to support our objectives, a paper would come requesting funding, which would come out of that 100k. The example would be the roundabout, the Worcester Way, where we supported the WEG and on-site advocacy with £15,000. So a paper was brought to a previous committee to ask to spend to allocate the £15,000 from our original £100,000. That £100,000 now has been exhausted. So we're asking basically for a top up, which we can.
So any requests for funding from that pot will be brought back to this committee for approval, yeah?
Yes, but there is a provision for if there's an urgent opportunity. So in many occasions, there's opportunities where if you spend a small amount of money, you can apply for grants. So 1.4 is delegating authority to chair and vice chair. If there's an urgent opportunity where for spending a few £1,000s, we might be able to gain either substantial investment or something along those lines, but only if we don't have time to come to committee. That's just to cover that. So on that basis, as committee, I'll ask everyone who's in favour of recommendations through 1.1 to 1.4. Okay, is that everyone? Owen? A bit more energy? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. So should we just take a short time out? 10 minutes? are we ready to go? Are we back live? Okay. So,
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. I have a very serious point of order to make. It's something which I've never had to do in 35 years membership of this council. But during the break, a member of this committee approached and verbally threatened another member of this committee and was using intimidatory behaviour. I don't intend to name names at this stage, but I would ask you to advise the committee about acceptable levels of behaviour in committee meetings and to ask members to avoid this kind of behaviour. It's certainly not in keeping with what you would expect from members of this council.
well, all I can say is I didn't witness anything myself because I was out of the room, but I would expect everyone to behave appropriately. And if members do have any concerns about other members' behaviour, then obviously the appropriate route is through the monitoring officer. Okay. So I just like to make people aware that we're getting late, and therefore, although we don't want to stifle debate, but if we can try and be a bit speedier, that would be appreciated by many people in the room. So on to agenda item 8, further investment in electric vehicle charging points. I'm going to hand over to David.
Thank you, Chair. At P&R in February, it was agreed to include an allocation an allowance within the capital programme of £200,000 to install more EV charge points in the council's car park, and this report relates to that allocation within the capital programme. It was agreed by council, but subject to a detailed report setting out the proposed business case. This is not that detailed report we have here tonight. This is an outline proposal, and as I go through the report, I'll explain why, because there's some match funding potentially available, so we need to get member approval really as officers to be able to go forward with the proposal and put that bid in for that match funding. So there's a core proposal that we will ask you to approve that I will go through. Due to the amount of funding potentially available, then there's a proposal. There may be an extension to that core proposal, which will be delegated to Chair and Vice Chair to add on, and that you authorise us as officers to submit a bid for additional external funding. So the proposal really it builds upon the charge points that we've got in St Martin's Gate car park. It talks about the numbers of chargers that we've got there. That's proving to be popular. There's been over 1,000 charging sessions in the last 12 months. 73,000 miles of EV mileage has been charged from our car parks. That's saved 14 tonnes of carbon dioxide. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a ban now on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars. What is clear is that providing more EV charge points is a sort of one of the key supporters of our environmental and sustainability strategy, and it is a specific action. So there's a government grant currently available, the On-Street Residential Charge Point Scheme, or ORCS, as is known in shorthand, and that can provide up to 60% of the total capital cost for on-street provision. So it's looking at, as was mentioned earlier in the discussion, it's looking at those residents that don't have off-street parking, so they can't easily, if they have an electric vehicle, they can't easily charge it at home. That does include council-run car parks, so that's within the remit of on-street. And we do recognise that a strategic approach needs to be taken to this in the longer term. So we're developing EV strategies. We talked about earlier in the action plan, the role the City Council can play. I think what I would say before we go into this, EV charging is going to grow and grow and grow. So whilst we don't have a long-term strategy in place at the moment, actually the numbers in here, even though it's a couple of £100,000, are relatively small, I think, in where we're going to be in numbers of charges and demands for charging in that medium to longer term. So it's better to act now than take 6 months to write a strategy and come back with it. We won't do anything now that won't be in line with that. So choosing a location for the EV charge points, a primary location is the fact that some of our car parks can be prone to flooding, and water and electricity don't mix too well, as I'm sure you appreciate. So that rules out a number of our car parks, as particularly for this phase one. And then the second consideration is about qualifying for the AUKS funding. So it's subject to a bid, but if we allocate this programme here to car parks that are eligible for the AUKS funding, potentially that's up to another 60% of the capital cost, reducing our investment and or freeing up some more opportunity to invest further. So the most suitable locations, in addition to St Martin's Gate, we think are King Street and Tallow Hill. I'm sure members are familiar with the location of those. They're both close to residential areas that have limited or no access to off-street parking. There's been some proactive demand from nearby residents asking around that. So we've got a small number of residents, but residents have asked for that. And as they're accessible 24 hours a day, the residential charging is generally an overnight slow charge. So that would work quite well for those people. King Street's also well used throughout the day. So putting chargers in there would also support people who want to charge over a shorter period and top up. And Tallow Hill is, as people will know, as members will know, is popular with commuters using Shrub Hill, so people sometimes park there for a longer period of time. There's some detail in there about the occupancy rates. King Street is a little bit fuller generally, not always overnight, of course. Tallow Hill has a lot of capacity, so there's plenty of room there. Most of the tickets bought are around that 3 or 4 hour window. It talks about some of the other car parks that could potentially be used, maybe in a second phase. So SMG, we could expand the offer there. Commandery car park is a fairly small car park, reasonably close to King Street, but does have some residential property near to it. Providence Street, perhaps less so as it's close to SMG, but could be used. And then I think Clare Street, probably less suitable. Just a note there that the EV charging bays are larger than conventional parking bays just due to the infrastructure around them. So when we come down to exactly where they're going to go in the car parks, that is a consideration, because you may lose a couple of spaces putting some new spaces in. Section 4 talks about the type and volume and the cost of the charges proposed. So the most common type, particularly those that are used at home or overnight, is a 7 kilowatt. That would fill a vehicle in something sort of 6 to 14 hours time. The vehicle technology is changing quite a lot. So the kilowatt hour number is how much energy can be stored in the battery. Typical small cars are 40, some of them now are getting up to about 100. Much larger vehicles. The next step up in a charge point would be a 22 kilowatt, just over 3 times as fast. And then the next level, which isn't proposed in this report at all, is going to 50 kilowatt. There's even 150 and 175 kilowatt available. Ultra rapid chargers. They tend to be at motorway service stations where people are on long journeys. They just want to stop, charge as quickly as possible. They'll pay a premium for that. Maybe just have a quick cup of coffee and then away, back on with their journey. They are tens of thousands of pounds, and really they're out with of the budget that we've got proposed for this, and not really suitable for our use. There's also some costs around the Western Power infrastructure costs, making sure that the local network can serve these. The relatively small numbers we've got, those costs aren't huge, but they are in the sort of single figure thousands of pounds for each of the car parks. There's a note there at 4.6, which I think is an interesting one, about sort of emerging charging behaviours, and there was a very interesting discussion at the summit in one of the workshops. Those making long distance journeys will want a very fast charge, clearly, because they want to stop and then get on with their journey, and they're using a lot of charge. People who are longer distance commuters will probably charge overnight at home. But also this was talked about, there's some emerging behaviour about people taking more of a top-up strategy. So whilst visiting the destination, there's a charger there, I'll use that, I'll top up my battery while I'm here, rather than running the battery down to empty and then filling it up every time. So that means it's quite complex behaviours that we need to try and model here and see if we can do something to serve those. And just points out, at the moment with a petrol or diesel car, you go to the garage, that's lost time while you're queuing to fill up and you're there. actually, if you could fill up whilst you were doing something else, which is what EV allows you, that's actually a bonus. That's more efficient. So what we're recommending is a mix of 7 and 22 kilowatt chargers. So slow charge overnight, a little bit faster charging for shoppers, perhaps who are coming for 3 or 4 hours to top up. The AUX guidance at the moment says 7 kilowatt chargers is what they're aimed at, unless you can make a really good case for something else. Our research indicates the cost difference isn't that great, so I think we'd probably look to make that case to the AUX fund that a mix would be more appropriate than just going for the 7 kilowatt. Section 5, there's a core proposal here. So 10 units in Tallow Hill, which would give up to 20 cars. So it's a significant statement from the council, I think. It's sort of 20 cars able to be charged in that car park. Slightly less at King Street. We think potentially up to a dozen we can fit in there. So that would be the core proposal, and the work we've done at the moment, and it's not a detailed feasibility work. We've had some initial indications of costs, and with the infrastructure, we think that would be up to around £150,000 would be the cost. So a little bit less than the 200,000 allocation in the capital programme. There's a procurement risk of cost inflation. We're not at the point today to ask you to allow us to go out and procure this and let a contract. So we think it's sensible to leave a bit of headroom in that core proposal, but that would be the core proposal that we'd also put forward for the AUX bid. So that's the first request of members. Then an extended proposal would include some additional charges at Tallow Hill, King Street, and potentially some of the other suitable car parks that the report mentions, sort of maximising use of the funding available and potential for AUX funding. And asking members that agreement of any detail of that, if we add some more in, would be delegated to the Director of Resources in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the committee. So on top of that core proposal. And then just wanted to draw your attention again to the AUX funding. So we will put a bid in for that, and then when things are finalised, we would bring a report back to this committee, which would be that detailed report. That would have a full analysis of the cost to the council. So there's a cost of borrowing, there's a cost of procurement, and give members the opportunity to talk about a pricing strategy and what will be a market rate, and really appreciate the full cost of this. And we would know at that point whether we have grant funding or not, which, as you appreciate, is a significant factor in our decision making. So we will submit a bid in November, look to do procurement through next year, but we develop that pricing strategy and that detailed business case and bring that back to the committee at the appropriate time in the new year. The financial and budgetary implications just point out there that currently borrowing £200,000, the revenue cost of that would be £25,000 a year. So the other implications I've dealt with the risk of procurement. Just to touch on there's always a risk of technology not matching market requirements or becoming obsolete. My analogy for this is if you're buying a mobile phone, there's always a better one about to come along. There's a danger of doing that. You'd never buy a new phone because you're always waiting for the better one to come along or something different. I think our experience in installing and operating chargers at SMG, our links with partners, and the fact this is a relatively small scale investment in the scheme of things mitigates that risk. It's fast developing technology in this area, but that's mitigated, but I want to bring that risk to your attention. So I've whisked through that, Chair, and very happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Just before I open up to questions, just think it's worth bearing in mind that although the Policy and Resources Committee agreed the funding, that request came from this committee. So the £200,000 budget was a request from this committee, and in effect, because there's the potential for the AUX grant of 60%, we want to try and spend, if it all works if the sums all match, we want to try and spend as close to the £200,000 as possible and not leave a load of that grant on the table. So that's why there's that little bit of wiggle room at 1.3 where we can fine tune the bid. So we're maximising our spend of the budget to generate the largest return on the grant. So I've got Jabba.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think two questions. One, what have officers and the council learned from the installations at St Martin's Gate, which overrun in budget, and obviously there were some technical issues around how we procured or issues with the procurement. So that's the first questions, and what we can take that from there into this exercise. And secondly, I think it was in terms of obviously the changing fast pace of technology, in terms of anything that we do procure, will we be easily able to upgrade at a later stage without doing any major infrastructure changes?
So I think your first question, I'm not going to try and answer that now. I don't have our property team that procured that, and I actually wasn't close to that project at that particular time, so I don't think it'd be right for me to try and sort of speculate or give you an answer on that now, but we'll take that away. Undoubtedly, there will be lessons to be learned. It wasn't the smoothest, but it has been a successful project. And as part of our procurement, one of the things we'll be looking at is future-proofing. So I flag that as a risk. We are very aware of that, and that's something for us to look at. When we've discussed the Western Power infrastructure that needs to go in, clearly you don't want to put in some infrastructure that allows us to put 8 chargers in, and then we decide next year we want another 8, and we have to go back to the infrastructure. So a cost-effective future-proofing of the infrastructure is something we're looking at.
Marjorie?
I own an electric vehicle, and it's given me many challenges. And there's 2 I particularly want to mention, in the hope that we can avoid challenging users of our charging points. And one of them is about the different types of charger. So I've sometimes turned up at a motorway services place and discovered that I can't charge my car because mine is an old-fashioned Type 2, and there's only CCS and CHAdeMO, or however you pronounce it. So I think, as well as future-proofing, we need to do a bit of back-proofing and make sure that simple chargers are available for those who've got older cars, if that's feasible. And then the other challenge I've sometimes faced is paying for my electricity, because sometimes you have to download an app and set up a password and goodness knows what. So can we please have chargers that you can just zap a card on, a debit card?
Thank you, good points. We can take those away. Yeah.
Okay.
Stephen?
Yeah, just as straightforward, really following what Marjorie said, actually. Yeah. Obviously, there are different types of electric cars, and there's the hybrid market, and obviously the plug-in hybrid market, especially if you've got a purely electric car and the battery is almost down, you can't move it. If you've got a hybrid one, you do have that option. You can put petrol into that. So I think it is very, very important that that there is discipline with using these things. So basically, priority should always be to fully electric cars, and also that we ensure that when cars are fully charged, they are moved as well. I understand, does this charge equipment have software so we are aware in terms of if a vehicle is kept on a bay too long and it's not moved, is there any way we can sort of regulate that? And also in terms of the actual charging speeds, 7% is fine for night, but obviously during the daytime you want a much higher speed. So not only for the convenience of the people who are charging the cars, but also so we get those parking spaces with those chargers recirculated several times during the day, so more people get the benefit of them, and the council will receive more revenue from them as well.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Yeah, so a couple of points there. Yes, and clearly, if they're in our car parks, then there's also there's a parking limit there, and our civil enforcement officers are able to patrol. So we don't want somebody being in a charging spot, charging up for 2 hours, and particularly being there for 24 hours. We also have commuters that come in for a whole day, and actually for them a 7 kilowatt for a whole day, and they're paying for parking for a whole day works. Tallow Hill particularly, King Street, slightly different behaviours there, which is why we're suggesting some faster chargers might be appropriate for King Street. It's a complex area and there are lots of different options, but we're doing our very best to sort of hit the right ones.
And that has been a big debate. But you've got different philosophies, different charging rates, different needs, probably need to accommodate lots of different scenarios. And I think we also need to just be aware of sort of hybrid versus full electric and make sure, again, we've got the focus in the right area. Ditta?
Thanks, Chair. David, very good. Mixed use is very applicable, I think, for different charges. I think your analysis about the mobile phone is always a catch-up, is a good recognition to have. Just a little bit of question. I'm quite content with the report, but the offset of the charging of the spaces, I mean, like you said, 10 at Tallow Hill and maybe overall it's 20 spaces. Would that offset the chargings that we regularly have that income from people who commute and park? Because obviously if they're chargers, they'll be only used for the electric vehicles, not for normal. So I know that they'll be paying for the electric, they'll be charging for that, but that offsets that. I'm just curious about what the loss would be.
And I think the key point there is around capacity that's available in the car park. So for Tallow Hill, it's about 2/3 full. That's the capacity. So Christmas will be different and peak times for events, but there's plenty of room in Tallow Hill to have these spaces as an additional. And King Street is a little bit tighter, but equally the overnight use, there's lots of capacity overnight. I think one of the other things to note is that as time goes on, actually there will be more demand for people just to come and park using electric vehicles. It'll become more common, so they won't be taking up space. It might start to get the other way around at some point. Makes sense.
Owen?
Thanks, Chairman. It's just maybe a trivial question, to be honest. I know nothing about electric vehicles. And just following on from what Councillor Bissett said about not having the right plug for the socket, or however that works, is there such a thing as an adapter? Because that would make an awful lot of sense to me. Does that exist?
Yes, it does. So basically, whatever type of electric vehicle you buy, your manufacturer should supply you with an adapter that will plug into various sorts of charge points.
Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I fully support the recommendations which are here, but as a St John's Council, I do have to question the decision to install all the charging points in city centre car parks, which encourages people to cross the river by car, adding to congestion in the city centre. So I have got a bit of concern about that. When you look at the facts at St John's Church, within 5 minutes walk of St John's Church, there are 2,000 people who haven't got off-street parking facilities. They've got absolutely nowhere to charge your vehicle, and that does concern me. But we're doing it, concentrating all our efforts in the city centre. I know you've mentioned community centres, but suburban areas like St John's do also require some assistance. And a thought which has crossed my mind while we've been having this debate is whether we should be given any support or assistance to residents where there are no on-street parking charging facilities, for cable gullers to be installed to enable cables from their own houses to be transported safely to the cars to enable people to charge their vehicles outside their own houses. We often hear of a risk of people tripping over cables. If there are cable gullies in the highway, same as you have with drop curb, that would enable that risk to be reduced. It's done elsewhere, particularly in Oxfordshire, and I do wonder if that's something which we could investigate in Worcester to enable cable gullies to be installed in residential streets so people can charge their own cars in the front of their own homes without having to take the vehicle off the highway.
Thank you, Councillor Chair. On the last point, I mentioned earlier, very, very briefly, really, talking about our EV charging strategy, and that we're talking to county officers around that. as we're well aware, cable gullies would be a county highways issue, and something that they would need to rule on and allow. It's a conversation we've started to have, so we will continue to pursue that. Regards to your point around the city centre and the broader out, it's a point well made. This initial piece of work is around something that will qualify us for the Orcs funding. So it has to be in council car parks to put this bid in. We're looking later, and it's within the action plan, perhaps to go out to community centres. There is one, possibly two chargers at the Warndon Community Centre at Shap Drive. There's also, and you'll be aware, Councillor, there's about 100 chargers going in at the university. I haven't had the conversation with those officers, and I will now, about what their plans are for overnight, etc., and whether they're going to make provision for that. And that's a significant investment on that side of the city. 100 chargers there, and yeah, I'll explore that with them further.
Simon?
Thank you, Chair. It's occurred to me, and this goes slightly beyond what we're actually looking at right now, but the other significant parking areas around the whole of the city are particularly focused at supermarkets, Sainsbury's, in St John's, etc., etc. I wonder whether one amount of leverage we certainly could use is that where any future developments are proposed which include car parks, we could make it a planning requirement that they include EV charging points. Perhaps with existing car parks, we may be able to find some way of encouraging them, but we certainly could do it as a planning requirement with new ones.
Certainly something we could take away and talk to planning colleagues around. I think Asda have some charge points in their car parks, and I'm sure commercial issues we'll start to see more of these available in supermarket car parks.
Certainly, one of the reasons for the EV strategy is to help encourage supermarkets, employers, places where people go that have car parks to install EV chargers by sharing with them the sort of growth figures, expectations for Worcester and the future demand. So that's part of the reason for the strategy.
Thanks, Chairman. Just quickly, I just wanted to say I thought Councillor Udall's idea was a great idea last year about parking gullies, and it's still a great idea now. Hasn't changed. Nothing's happened, obviously. I suspect we may disagree on who would be responsible for paying for it, but I wanted to go on record and say I think it's a very good idea. And the more this moves forward, I'll be happy to support it.
Right. If everyone's had a say, are we happy to move to the vote and the as per 1.1, 1.2 and 1.3 in the recommendation on the paper? All those in favour? Vote things on. Shane.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware that we've reached a point in the cycle when we start to think about the budget for the coming year. This report is a normal one at this stage, and it's primarily just for background. It's about informing members where we are with the budgets which are relevant to this particular committee. This area is the biggest single area of spend in the council. So out of our 24 million pound budget, 8 million is within the remit of Environment Committee. And we will have to be thinking as we go through to the budget stage whether or not there are different priorities. We need to look at different areas of expenditure. One thing that's really important to consider is that almost all of that is matched by income within this committee. So we've got of our really serious areas of income around car parking, bereavement services, and a number of non-statutory services such as green waste and bulky waste and so on and so forth fall within the remit of the committee. And one of the key decisions in the next few months will be what fees and charges rates we want to be setting. There's a serious consideration needed to ensuring that our income continues to keep pace with our rising costs, which members will be well aware of. Appendix 2 covers the capital programmes, which we cover all of the capital programmes, not just those which are relevant to the committee, because a number of them actually stretch across different committees, and also they go on for a number of years. So there are wider implications for those. So we don't try to break them down into individual committees. And just note in passing the spend, £5 million of spend on vehicle replacement. So those figures are higher than the ones considered in the report previously, because obviously that's not just RCVs, it also includes other vehicles and mowers and vans and so on within that. But that's an ongoing programme of work to replace those. In terms of the final appendix, which was a supplementary paper, if you haven't received them, I think it's been tabled. This sets out the previous considerations around our city plan work that's been developed by this particular committee over time. And the comments in there are perhaps to be considered not so much as a clear statement of whether or not the spending against each one of those areas is complete. Obviously, where it is complete and has been delivered, then it's quite straightforward. But there are a number of areas where a certain amount of expenditure has been committed, and we're in dialogue with service managers at the moment as to whether or not what's remaining on those budgets is available to be considered for repurposing, or is there still a degree of commitment against those. So we're not finished that process yet. That will continue. When we get to the January committees and on into February, then we will be looking to see across the whole of the city plan whether there are a number of areas which we can free up from the reserves. We know that there's a significant gap in our budget for this year. There'll be a significant gap in the budget for next year. Therefore, as many reserves as we have available to help us cover those gaps will be very useful for us when it comes to setting the budget at the beginning of the year, next year. So at the moment, it's just primarily for information to start the discussion, start members thinking about whether or not they want to reprioritise, think about things in a different way. And to make a plea, as always at this stage, that if there are ideas, then the quicker that myself and Mark and the finance team have information about them, then the quicker we can provide support to you in terms of bringing forward a fully committed idea. And there is no doubt this year we will need to have very strong commitments to and clear agreements before we get to the policy resources stage, because there will be limitations. We will have to make some serious choices, and that will have to be built on strong evidence-based thinking. Any questions at this stage? I'm happy to take them, but as I say, it's primarily background information at this stage.
Okay, I just thank you for that. I just wanted to list a few of the specific things that this sort of committee's sort of legacy items or areas that have been discussed before that would have a potential impact on the budget. So for 2 years we agreed. Well, so last year and the year before we had £80,000 for the city centre street cleaning and hit squad, which this year we were going to look to via a report try and build into the base budget, based on the fact that it was a sort of necessity to keep the city centre clean to the standards that we expect, and also tackle one-off issues like graffiti as they arise. That's something that we might decide to just roll over as a one-off again, rather than trying to build it into the base budget. We've obviously already had goals this evening. Obviously, the sustainability budget of 150,000 that we're going to ask for again as a one-off. The goals obviously is a one-off. We also talked about asking for more capital for additional EV chargers over and above the ones we've talked about in the last paper. And if we did the same again, that would be another 200k. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we've also got the referral report on air quality monitors to come forward as well. The amount would be subject to how successful would be on achieving the grant. So I just wanted to remind the committee of those sort of ongoing or sort of legacy items that are already in our midst, and just reiterate if we can have no surprises and people turning up on the night in March with a great idea and asking for money. I think it's unfair on officers. I think it's unfair on the rest of the committee to be put on the spot. So therefore, to get in touch with officers early and allow them to provide information and data to support ideas. Okay, anyone got anything else to say? Questions? No? So can we therefore approve the recommendations as laid out at 1.1 and 1.2? Yep, is everyone? Marvellous. So on to agenda item 10, Q2 performance reports.
Take that one, Chair. I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy to take that one, Chair. Q2 performance report, conscious of time, so I won't spend very long on it, Chair. It lists out the key projects that are this committee is responsible for monitoring and the performance indicators. In respect of the projects, more green than yellow and red. The 3 projects in yellow, just to reassure members, those projects are underway, they're just slightly delayed, but they are making decent progress. The 1 red project, Chair, new signage across all Worcester City car parks. The reason that hasn't been progressed is that we're waiting for the car parking order to be put in place, which brings together the new rules for St Martin's Gate, including the electric vehicle charging tariff. So as soon as we've got that car parking order signed off, we can then progress to putting the signs together, but also conscious of what Shane has mentioned regarding fees and charges, and members may want to have a look at that prior to next year. So that one's just on hold at the moment. And in respect of the key performance indicators, I'll just comment on the 1 red one, which is the percent of household waste composted, and members won't be surprised to hear that the reason that is red is because we had such a dry summer. We didn't have much grass during the summer months to be able to put in our brown bin. So that's the reason that one is showing red for this year. But happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, any questions? Gone. Okay, so are we all happy to support the recommendation as laid out in 1.1? Is everyone? Okay, thank you very much. We have no any other business, so I'll happily call the meeting closed. Thank you very much.